hot topic today.
Just because you're not the type of person who tracks everything in a spreadsheet, which even I don't do all the time, doesn't mean it's not very noticeable. And it's painful.
So it's not just Canada. It's happening everywhere. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to As Told by Canadian Immigrants. And welcome to our special guest, Samantha Ghanie, who is a personal finance expert, and she's joining us here today on Cost of Living Series Wednesday, which is a part of our Cost of Living Canada series that comes out every Wednesday. I invited Samantha here as a personal finance expert and founder of Samantha Mantra, which is a coaching business that focuses on BIPOC, so that's Black and Indigenous people of color, and first-generation graduates as they navigate their careers and finances. Hot topic today. You did say that on TikTok, every other thing is like a cost of living, right? So yeah, finances, super important. She has been quoted in many articles. Some of them are on money, pay, and finances by platforms such as USA Today and Quartz. And she has her own podcast. She's the host of the podcast, the PayDay podcast. It's PayDay. I listen to a couple. I love it. And she talks about, topics that help people to understand and tackles the issues around money, work, and pay to escape the trap of being broke. Don't we all know it? She's a first-generation American, so she's not in Canada. However, we know that everybody's complaining about the cost of living in Canada a lot. But is it Canada or is it everywhere?
Yes and yes.
Well, there we go. So now she's going to talk to us today about some of the cost of living, experiences living in the US. She is a first-generation American, which means that her parents or immigrants, her parents are from Guyana, Caribbean country, Guyana. And we're going to talk about cost of living everywhere and how to combat these rising costs of living with smart money moves by Miss Financial Expert. Yes, Samantha. I want to call you Samantha Mantra. It's like it's kind of rolling off my tongue that I want to say Samantha Mantra.
Samantha Mantra is the website. It's the business.
There we go.
But Samantha Ghanie is the woman behind it.
There we go. Okay, so welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be with me and be with us and share with my platform today. I want you to start off by just talking a little bit about your journey as a first-generation American. I remember you said you're like 50% American, 50% Guyanese, because you went back so often.
Yes.
So you feel Guyanese to some extent. So tell me a little bit about your journey as a first-generation American, and then how did you come about a career in finance?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for having me, Christina.
Absolutely.
So I'm a first gen, but I'm a first gen whose parents made a decision and they had the option to work double shifts to take me back almost every year. And that's not the average experience for most first generations, regardless of where your parents are from. It's very expensive to go back, wherever back is, right? So it wasn't until I was an adult I realized both what that cost them and what that gave me. It gave me a lot of perspective about why we left, why we stayed, why we worked as hard as we did to make a life for ourselves.
Cool. And as a kid, as in, when did it stop? Like you kept on traveling back and forth, I guess, until you were
all the way. Yes, into adulthood, well into adulthood, after college. It didn't stop. And so like it just gives you a broader understanding of the world and issues that you think might just be your issues or issues in the country. You're like, oh, this is everybody's issues. It's just playing out differently.
Yes. And so you got like a taste of what it's like to be an immigrant, sort of going back, like have a different culture from where you were born. And
let me give you a good example. When I started one of my first roles, I had one of those bosses who believed in working on vacation. And she didn't understand that I was going back to the jungle and that there's no Wi-Fi, there's no electricity. We're running on generators.
Yes.
And my boss and I had a real conflict over this. I said, no, I can't work on vacation, not because I'm a hard worker. Never mind that that's illegal. But I can't work on vacation because there is nothing to work with.
Yeah. Culture shock for them.
That was, I think she thought I was lying. I really do.
Yeah.
So I remember pulling up Google Maps and just pointing to a spot in the jungle and being like, that's it.
That's it. Deep in the Amazon.
We're
Okay.
from the Amazon. That's where we're from.
And you actually have a little accent. I don't know if you've been
It
told.
comes and it goes. It
Yeah.
comes and it goes. I try not to force it, but it's
Yeah.
there.
Okay. So you are living in America, in the
Yes.
New York City, which I think like Toronto is kind of like comparable to New York City to some extent in terms
Yeah.
of like what it costs to live here.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dive into like, well, you mentioned some really good factors last time we were having a conversation about how the things that are affecting our cost of living in terms,
Yes.
especially our grocery bills, right? So we're gonna talk about grocery bills and we're gonna talk a little bit about rent afterwards. But
Sure.
like from your perspective and your point of view, what is influencing the spikes in our cost of living, the spike we're seeing in our grocery bills?
So from a US point of view, and I think even a North American point of view, 2021 was like kind of a turning point year. 2020 to 2021, we were all dealing with COVID and however that impacted our communities and our businesses. But in 2021, there was a national continental decision that companies could use this to price gouge. And this is not private information. They've said it publicly on their shareholder earning calls. If you spend 3 minutes Googling,
Yeah.
right, you will find very dedicated reporters who wrote it up.
Yeah.
They said they want to take another 20% out of our pockets, and then they proceeded to do so. So part of this is price gouging. Part of this is climate change. Crops are not growing predictably. Those rainy seasons turn around and disappear or come back. And part of this is war.
Yeah.
The places that produce are under conflict. And as somebody who comes from the third world and doesn't have a problem saying that, the third world is where the production is done, whether it's the production of food or garments or the tools that we use to live our lives in the first world.
Yeah.
And you get those three factors together and you get this insane inflation. I'm not sure 100% how it compares to Canada, but in the US, it got as high as nearly 15% before coming back down. And that's the highest it'd been since like the 70s.
Well, I've been playing around with the numbers here. Sometimes I hear 7, sometimes I hear 8, but up is up. Like when we're thinking about it in the supermarket, we're not thinking, oh, this is a 15% more. No, it's more.
Although, like when I was doing some cleaning and I pulled out like a grocery bill, you don't forget to throw away paper sometimes and you do a deep clean and you're like, eggs cost this much. You just compare it to the one you just did on Saturday. You have a real moment of, wait a second. Just because you're not the type of person who tracks everything in a spreadsheet, which even I don't do all the time, doesn't mean it's not very noticeable. And it's painful.
Yes, it is, and especially since like we need food to eat and live.
None of us are farmers, I don't think, living in New York and Toronto, which means we need money to buy bread and cheese.
Yeah, and then rent. I know New York City is known for being pretty pricey. I don't know do you know like the average cost to rent say a bedroom or, well, yeah, you said yes, so you know.
So it depends on what borough. New York City is all 5 boroughs, but we're looking at an average of over 2K in general, right? 2,000.
And it's the same here. Like different provinces have like the more rural provinces are a little bit lower, and I'm sure upstate New York is lower than closer to, but yeah, 2K is like the base model. You can get something.
In a country where most people earn less than 3,000 to 4,000 net after taxes, after health insurance, after retirement, that math don't math. Which means credit cards have been running up.
And so what you are seeing in terms of the numbers, in terms of what people are making on a monthly basis, sounds very similar to what's happening over here in Canada as well, in terms of what people are making versus what people are spending. So it's not just Canada, it's happening everywhere.
Yes, and it's global. It's hard when you're struggling to look outside of yourself. But if you look at like Europe, for example, you'll see like working class Europeans, they've been complaining about utility bills. Depending on what circles you move in, you might think of Europe as this place where people have what they need. But when people complain about heat, light, and groceries, that means people don't have what they need.
And gas. How is your gas your gas bill in terms of for your car?
New York is not a driving city, right? But if you look just out, we have the buses and the trains. So most New Yorkers don't necessarily drive all the time, but the cost is up.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see it if you step like just across the river into Jersey
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the prices, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
so they have also experienced their own inflation. I think the highest I had heard of, which doesn't mean that, it was the highest, was like almost $8 in California per gallon. And then we
What?
saw, yes,
What?
yes. And then in the New York or the New York metropolitan area, fours and fives. So 4.86 at the gallon or $5.20 at a particularly busy spot where they know people will run out of gas.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So
Yeah.
people like people who do drive around the city have their gas station, the one that's just far enough from the highway that they know is going to have a slightly lower price. And people be like, no, don't go to that one today. They've raised their prices again.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these are basics. These are things people use for their transit, for their food. And so it's everybody.
Everybody, and it's everywhere. I just came from Jamaica and I tried to do a comparison in terms of groceries.
Yep.
And people were saying to me, okay, well, buy local. If you buy local, it's going to be cheaper. Yes. But as I have a picky toddler.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to buy the food that I know she's going to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to the market. So even if I
Mm-hmm.
just do a comparative analysis, like I know that, okay, so maybe what I get in Canada, in Jamaica, it would be imported. So of course it's going to be more costly. But in general, just going to the supermarket in Jamaica was very costly. The electricity bill in Jamaica was costly. It's everywhere, guys. It's not just Canada. It's everywhere. And when you leave Canada, because a lot of people are like kind of saying, I think a lot of people in Canada are waning between like, do I stay or do I go to the US? They're not necessarily going back to their home countries, but do I go to the US? I know that housing, I think, is cheaper than in Canada right now.
Yes. But I don't know how much longer that will play out that
Mm-hmm.
way. So
Mm-hmm.
the US has underbuilt housing since the 2008 crash.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never heard of that, that's a lot of reading to go through, but suffice to say, there was a crash
Mm-hmm.
and construction never resuscitated as an industry. They only built high rises after that point. So luxury apartments, no
Mm-hmm.
middle class, no starter homes. That's what they're called here, the smaller places that you could live. That's across the country.
Yeah.
So now the cost of living crises that have been playing out in the coastal cities, which are the most expensive parts of the US, have reached places like Alabama and Mississippi and Iowa.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much longer that would be true.
And everything is going to be relative. Like I think in some places something is going to be more expensive, but then something else might be more expensive somewhere else. Like healthcare is probably going to be a little bit more expensive to you guys and us, even though we're heavily taxed. I don't know what the trade-off is. You'd have to really do some math to figure out which place makes sense, or is it just everywhere? So over your last 5 years of experience working in finance, right? What advice do you often find yourself giving to first generation graduates and young professionals in the US or even generally, because like whatever is applicable everywhere, who are really trying to navigate these financial waters? Like what do you hear? What do you give most often, and what challenges do you hear often too?
Yes. So the advice I give most often is, let's take a breath, let's pull back, and let's look at everything together, because folks usually will come to me fixated very reasonably on a singular issue. It could be, I really need to buy a house. It could be, I really need to do XYZ. And I'm like, let's look at everything for a second, which is an overwhelming exercise. But once we do it, then I'm like, oh, this is or isn't the problem. And that exercise allows me to say exactly how much more they need to make.
Yeah.
Because people anywhere will say, I just need to do this. And that's usually not true.
Yeah.
I could tell them, hey, 20K is the difference between your dreams or not. And that it incites a very different kind of motivation in a person.
Yeah.
Like,
and is that 20K a month? Is that 20K a year? Is that?
Depends on their person. But usually when we pull back and look at it holistically, I'm like, you've got these areas of life stable. These are the ones that are in flux. This works out to plus or minus X $1,000, which means if we raise salary, then we stabilize all categories of life. And once the ground is stable under your feet, you can actually build on it. I think the hardest part of the pandemic years, besides the actual pandemic, has been that we don't know what we're doing. The tides keep shifting. It doesn't feel like there's any stable ground.
Yeah.
So we have to pick our basics to be stable. And once they're stabilized, then we can start to build a life that we actually want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult. And none of the things I just said are easy.
No.
And our governments aren't making it easier, but they can be done.
And we aren't necessarily schooled in this train of thought either, right? So we're kind of like more money, more money, more money, but not really analyzing the money that we do have or the spending.
And how do we apply it, right? Because that's another thing I talk a lot. So debt is a part of the American story. And I feel like it's becoming part of the Canadian story a little bit, based on just what I hear anecdotally. When people have debt, they do a lot of different things. And so I'll use an American example of student loans. If you took $1,000 and just threw it at your student loans to pay it off, that would be less effective than targeting a particular student loan and applying the money differently. So it's not just about what we earn and what we make and what we keep, but also how are you going to use your dollars?
Yeah. And that's a good point in terms of debt. So that's an example of, okay, if you throw $1,000 at the student loan, that's not effective. What is an effective strategy for debt?
So in the student loan example, it would be actually looking at the student loan breakdown. Most people in America have more than 5. Yeah, because they'll take them out per semester, as they were advised to do by college counselors at the time. This is, again, a millennial Gen X problem. Gen Z has a little bit different information. And they'll be like, oh, this one is at 5% and the rest are at 2%. So I can pay off the 5% one and eliminate the overall interest applied. The math that is for student loans should be illegal because it doesn't actually make sense.
Yeah.
But that's one example.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So it's basically paying off the loan or the debt that has the highest interest.
Yep.
Yes.
Which is good financial sense. People who do get any type of financial education, they never get the chance to actually think about it practically outside of a math problem. Here you are, you're a mom of 2. What do you do first?
Yeah. Wing it one day at a time. All right. So now in your podcast, it's Payday. You dive into discussions about money and work. Can you share some key lessons or themes from your podcast that have resonated with your listeners, especially in navigating the challenges that we just really spoke about?
One of the big ones that people love when they come to me and talk about is how your mindset affects how you deal with your money. So when I say mindset, I'm not talking about it in a social media way, like wealth or abundance mindset. I'm talking about it in a psychological way, the way your therapist might talk about it.
Yeah.
What is your default assumption? Do you assume you will never have enough, or do you assume that you will eventually have enough? And how does that impact which choices you choose to take on in your work, your career, and in your financial life?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people talk themselves out of higher earning opportunities at work and don't even realize it. And also, a lot of people may have some issues tangled up in their head with how they allocate their funds.
Yeah.
And that may play out as scarcity mindset. That could play out as just like, I will be working hard forever. I'm a hustler. My mom was a hustler. My dad was a hustler. We're just going to work 2-3 jobs and make it. And I'm like, that's great. But what would it look like for us to work 1?
Money trauma.
Yes. So that's the biggest theme that people return to again and again.
Okay. And what strategies can you recommend now? So those are the mental. What can we put in place to manage these increased costs of living? Because I feel like even if you run away from the problem in Canada, which is, some people are moving for that reason, it doesn't mean it's not going to catch up with you.
Yes.
So how do you manage these increased costs of living that's really happening everywhere?
Yes, I think that's a great question, because we're also seeing that in the US. Like a whole bunch of US American citizens have moved out the country, those who could afford to, in part for this reason. Where do they go? They go to Mexico, Portugal, Spain. There was the golden visa. I forget if it was Portugal or Spain, but they're taking it away because so many Americans have arrived.
Whoa.
Yes, immigration is playing out partly for financial factors. And it used to be, you'd just be like, what, maybe 10 or 20,000 people, retirement, their money stretches outside the US. They could still be citizens, but these are people who are much younger, people in their childbearing years. It's a big question, right? I could spend hours talking to you about it, but the highlight's real. You have to decide what's important to you. So if you stepped back, right? I'm a New Yorker for life. And one of the reasons I'm a New Yorker for life is my city is frenetic. And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that I can eat any cuisine in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I love our library system.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that you can't tell a New Yorker no.
I
When
was
you
gonna say, like, well, we can eat anything in Toronto, so you could probably come to Toronto. But you said you can't tell a Canadian, no, you can, and they'll say sorry too.
New Yorkers, we deserve our reputation. We are kind without being nice, I think is a good way to sum it up.
Mm-hmm.
We will save your life on the subway and ask you why you did that at the same time.
Yeah.
But I love that about my city. I've traveled the world. I've loved other cities. So what non-financially binds you to a place?
Mm.
If the answer is nothing, then go ahead and examine your options,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm.
Like, do you need to be by a body of water to be happy?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a lake or an ocean?
Mm-hmm.
Can you be happy inland? Like, what really would make your life good?
Mm-hmm.
And then start to put money back into the picture. Okay, well, I don't care where I am, but I do care that I'm not working in my 60s or 70s.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that will process of elimination quite a few places right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you care about? Are there people you want to provide for, whether it's back home, wherever back home is, or already here,
Mm-hmm.
calling you for their snacks? Which,
Yeah.
like, where are your people and who do you choose to care for? Who do you want to have the option to? For
Mm-hmm.
example, you may have no kids, but you're like, there's some baby cousins you'd like to provide for.
Mm-hmm.
And as you start to answer your own questions, and that's my first technique. Can you answer your own questions?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what's important to you?
Mm-hmm.
And usually the list is nothing we can buy in a store.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, what would make this list of things you just told me is important? What would make that a comfortable life?
Yeah.
Because people
Yeah.
have reflexes. They'll say, I want the most penthouse suite, Bugatti, the most but then you actually get down to it and they're no longer just talking off their first reflex.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you don't want to be in a $500 spa. You want a massage once a month. Big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let's lifestyle design first.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like reverse engineering your life.
Yeah. And then say they did the math, they
Mm-hmm.
did the reverse engineering,
Mm-hmm.
decided that, you know what, I want gym membership at Lifetime. I don't know if you guys have Lifetime down there, but Lifetime here is turned down for what in terms of like the monthly
What
cost?
is the monthly?
Yeah, I want my toddler to go to Montessori, all these wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
So you did the math, you figure out where you're doing. How do you now get your finances to match the dream, the vision?
So an American problem, I think it's a North American problem. I think it's a problem in any Western country, is we try to do everything at the same time.
Yeah.
So here you'll see somebody get married, get pregnant, and have a house in the same year. And I know their bank account is on fire. I know their credit cards have steam coming off of it. And I know that they're not enjoying these big life goals. And the goals I just listed, those were traditional ones. I don't care. My clients want untraditional. You want a tattoo that's culturally relevant and important. You want a year off to travel the world every 5 years. As long as it's a life goal for you, it's a goal for me as I manage the money. But most people, again, this is a Western problem, even if you're an immigrant, they don't want to do it 1 year at a time.
No.
Like in your first year. Like your first big goal is buying a house. Can you let that cool off before you're like, the next thing I want to do is own a horse? Or it doesn't matter, but like when you're specific and it's big, it helps illustrate the dream in your head better.
And that's a really solid point, because you know what? Right now, what's in the media trending is people leaving Canada, and people leaving Canada in like even a year or even under a year of being in Canada. And I feel like my response to seeing something like that is that, well, one, maybe you had unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
And two, maybe you try to get everything all at once. You thought you were going to land here. Canada was going to say, here's your dream on a silver platter. Yeah, here's the house, here's the car, here's all these wonderful things, versus thinking of it as it's a 10-year process. It's a 5 to 10 year process, you know, and it's okay to chunk the goals down in manageable size over time. And kind of just know that that's kind of how life works, unless you were born with a silver spoon. Is it a silver spoon or a gold spoon?
Either one. I think you're hitting on something, and I think it's a shift in immigration, because when my parents came, there was no social media.
Yeah.
Maybe the newspaper made it down eventually a week later, right? So a lot of immigrants who came in the 90s, when mine did, they didn't know what they were getting into.
Mhm. And that's generally the case. Like you really
And
don't know
that's
what you're
still
getting
generally the
yourself into.
case. And so people will see things on social media now, right, which may as well have replaced our newspapers for worse.
Yes,
But they don't really know.
they don't.
And you work so hard
Mm-hmm.
in North America overall, comparative to where you might have worked
Mm-hmm.
previously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a ton of people who have 3 jobs back home.
Yeah.
It's very easy for me to list a laundry list of people who have 3 jobs here.
Yeah. Yep.
And
That's
so
the
the
reality.
difficulty level is understated to immigrants, I think,
Mm-hmm.
frequently.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very different based on your education as you're coming
Yes.
into the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big difference whether you have a college degree, whether or not they accept it or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, a lot of the immigration that's happening in Canada is kind of targeting high skilled
And
people
that's a
who.
shift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a shift. We used to target mid and lower skill because they wanted us for labor. And there's real reasons why their own citizens who've been here for several generations are not performing that labor.
Yeah.
Has to do with pay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
Comes
that's
right back to pay.
same here. Some of the labor shortages are because the people that are here don't want to do those jobs for that pay. It doesn't.
And that tells you that it's underpaid work.
Yes.
It tells you that it's a step up over indentured work. And when they say that it's not, they're just looking at a cat and calling it a dog.
Yeah. Yes. So share a story with me or a testimonial maybe of somebody that you kind of helped to turn from rags to riches. That's kind of an extreme.
And that's my goal.
I know, exactly. So like just somebody who you helped to practically apply these principles that you're seeing
Yes.
here too, and you know how the outcome was.
Yes. So I've had a lot of clients, a couple hundred now. They got laid off, and layoffs are a rolling out thing. They got laid
Rolling
off.
out.
They were only making 60K,
Mm-hmm.
and they were self-supporting. 60K with roommates is not the same as 60K by yourself.
Mm-mm.
I took them from 60K to 90K. So we had a 30K increase.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time in their life, they have over $10,000 saved.
Oh, for the
And
first
they've
time in their life.
for the
Fun.
first time in their life.
Yes.
And they had debt. Like I said, debt is part of the American story at this point.
Yes.
We set up a plan to pay down medical bills
Mm-hmm.
and consumer debt, and that is decreasing, which means their net worth is increasing.
Yes.
And that's my biggest focus as someone who focuses on BIPOC, net worth, to make sure that net worth actually increases in communities of color.
Yes.
Because for my whole lifetime, it's been decreasing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it feels really good to pull back and say, okay, so this is the salary and these are the bills, but looking at this down here, your net worth increase is something like 50K.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how you helped them with that increase was another job? Was it like a $30 raise basically at a?
It was 30,000
Yeah.
raise
$30?
at their
30,000. That's what I
it
meant.
was 30,000 more at their newest job. So I coached them to apply to different kinds of roles.
Yes.
Once you have your education, I personally don't believe you should be going back to school unless you want to.
Yeah.
But that's again because student loans are the story here in America.
Yeah.
So avoiding that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so beautiful to watch them go from struggling to pay just for rent and food. They have money to save for the first time in their life for their retirement. They can plan a vacation and it's not going to be on credit cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the stories that make me go like this.
Yes.
When I hang up the call.
Of course. And they should be dancing in their pants too, because it's such a relief when you don't have that financial burden on you, right?
It is.
Perfect. Well, thanks for sharing that story.
Thank you.
So now in your consultancy, I know you've helped a lot of people over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share like a success story or a strategy that has effectively helped somebody to break free from the financial struggles?
Yes. So I'm going to use the word broke. And broke, when I use the word, is not synonymous with poor.
Mm-hmm.
Poor is when you and your bank account are in a staring contest and whoever blinks first is going to be overdraft or not. Broke is when you still have like an emergency fund. You could still call your mom. There's still like one last call you could make to do something. A lot of people live here broke. I think it's about 80% of all US workers age 16 to 65. And these numbers are very similar to Canada. Yes. They're living a version of paycheck to paycheck, even if they have savings. There's no money to do what would be considered smaller luxuries.
Yes.
Like massage your nails if you're a woman, or going to certain sports events if you're a man. I'm being generalistic, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's no money left over.
Yes.
And that's really tightened in the last 2 years since the inflation bump started in 21. Part of it is we need to make more money, but part of it is we need to understand how we use our money now.
Yeah.
So that means you need to understand who you are as a person. Are you a spender or a saver?
Yeah.
Most people will fall into one of those two categories.
Mm-hmm.
And so my recommendations are different for spenders versus savers.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Yes.
So if you're a spender, I'm like, we're going to do automatic saving.
Mm-hmm.
We're not waiting till the 15th and the 30th. We're going to, but overall, all of us, we're going to start treating ourselves like an uncompromisable bill.
Mm-hmm.
You don't call up your electric company and say, can you wait 2 more days?
Yeah.
So Samantha gets paid first. I'm a bill.
Yeah. Yes.
You don't compromise with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that requires having a little wiggle room in the budget, but not a lot. You can do that even if you only have $200 or $300 wiggle room.
Yeah.
Don't be embarrassed to start small. If all you can save is $50, you save $50, more than you had last month. And you make your savings automatic. You make yourself a line item. You make it uncompromisable. The bill is paid. I am paid. Now all these other incidentals can come in here.
Exactly. You Inc. Okay.
Pay
you first. Yes. Okay. Well, you've shared a lot of golden nuggets and tips. I appreciate you so much, you know, spending the time with me and sharing with my audience, talking about these things. Like she said, go back and watch this whole video. Take some notes on how to get financially literate, get money savvy, escape broke, which is different from being poor or poverty, like she said. And how can people find you?
You could find me on samanthamantra.com. I am at Samantha_mantra on TikTok and Instagram. And you can find me pretty much on every podcast platform at the PayDay podcast.
It's PayDay. Some really good tips from there. I love it. Thank you. It's really good tips. I appreciate you again. Thank you so much, guys. Stick around for more helpful videos like this. Subscribe, like, and share with anybody who you think that this may be valuable to. And I'll see you next time, but they will see me in the next video. Bye.
Thanks, Christina.